It is now my pleasure to welcome Nandan Nilekani, co-founder of Infosys, and Dr. Samir Saran, president of the Observer Research Foundation, ORF, to really discuss what the future looks like for the Asian region in terms of economy, geopolitics, and governance.
Let me thank the World Governance Summit for inviting us to this very important conversation they are hosting over the couple of days. And I am delighted to host Mr. Nandan Nilekani for a fireside conversation on what should we do in 2021 as governments, as communities, as nations. Mr. Nilekani is the co-founder and chairman of Infosys, one of the technology giants of the world. And he is the creative energy and in some sense, the father of the Indian Digital ID program, also known as Aadhaar. Mr. Nilekani, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Samir. It's great to be here.
Mr. Nilekani, we meet in interesting times. We are in the middle of a pandemic and we are looking to rebuild, reset, restart as communities, as nations. In your assessment as a business leader and someone who has a glimpse into the government as well, what do you think will be the defining features of economic recovery and growth in the days ahead for India, but more importantly for the Asian region, a region with great potential and with young energy?
Thank you, Samir. I think the immediate need of the hour in the entire region is accelerating the pace of vaccination. We are very fortunate that the scientific community has come out with a large number of vaccines that are proving to be very effective. And we are also lucky that a lot of the manufacturing is in India and in Asia. And therefore, I think if we can roll out the vaccinations across all the countries in the region and quickly reach some kind of herd immunity before new virus variations come, I think that will set the stage for people to start becoming more confident about going back to office, about traveling, about going sightseeing and so on. Because I think the recovery will come from the consumers. The consumers have been sitting at home for a long time, unable to spend money, saving money. In fact, savings rates have gone up. And therefore, I do see a burst of consumption across the region. And that's very good news in terms of creating economic growth and consumer growth. And many of the industries which were laid low by the pandemic, like travel, tourism, hospitality, airlines, will start seeing a quick recovery in the coming months. I also feel that what the pandemic has shown is the value of digitization. And as you know, the world has accelerated digitally. And what happened in a few weeks would normally have taken a few years, like our use of video conferencing, our acceleration of e-commerce, food delivery, and so on. And therefore, I think governments around the world are beginning to realize that they need to be on a strong digital platform for the nation. And we are very fortunate in India that over the last decade, we have built this digital infrastructure like identity through Aadhaar, payments through unified payment system, and account aggregation through the account aggregator network, which allows you to empower people with their own data. An example of the benefit was in India, we were able to directly credit money into people's bank accounts in a matter of days, which many countries took weeks and months to do because of the strong infrastructure we had. So I think governments will reinvest and refocus on creating digital infrastructure. And finally, I think it's about job creation. It's about putting people back to work, especially those who have lost livelihoods. And that requires creating an economy where millions of small businesses can get access to credit and capital so they expand and create more jobs. So I think these are some of the priorities, and I'm personally quite bullish that once we have the pandemic behind us, we will have a real surge in economic activity around the world and certainly in Asia.
Mr. Nilekani, you are someone who is set out to invest your energy and resources in creating a global technology hub out of India. Which are the exciting technologies of the future that you believe could be defining the decade ahead. We are also starting the third decade of the century. We have the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 to respond to. We have the climate change challenge. We have the health challenge that we are currently facing. Which are the breakout technologies for you? Give investors a tip. What should they be putting their money in? Give governments a clue. What should they be catalyzing as the breakout technologies for the decade ahead?
Well, I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, digital acceleration is here to stay. And so many of the things that we see today are acceleration of existing trends. For example, the movement of business to a cloud, where people use a multiplicity of public and private clouds. So it moves away from having everything in-house to having a lot of stuff on the cloud and some stuff in your private cloud. Then there's the whole AI and big data revolution. Today, AI has become very, very powerful, both for business as well as for governments. To give an example, in India, we have the GST system, which is our indirect tax system for the nation, completely technology-based. And that has been showing very good collections for the last 5 months. And part of the reason, I believe, is the use of AI to catch fraud and detect people who are using fraud methods. So AI is not only for consumer like voice recognition, but it can also be used by government to improve the tax collections and so on. And then I think the digital other changes are robotics. We are seeing an increase in robotics. And then there is the whole trend towards globalization of services. So I think the pandemic has done a very interesting thing. It may have put some kind of limits on the globalization of goods, because governments may want to put some trade barriers and so on between nations. But globalization of services has accelerated, because what work from home has shown is it doesn't matter whether you're in Boston, Bahrain, or Bangalore, you can still do your work. And that actually means that you can do your work from anywhere. So globalization of services is another area where countries will have to invest. And then, of course, we are seeing a lot more understanding how technology is important for countries' strategic goals. We have seen challenges in the semiconductor industry and so on. And therefore, countries will increasingly look at how to become more self-reliant, especially on key technologies for the future.
No, in fact, that's a good point you make there. And I really wanted to ask you a question pertaining to the geopolitics of technology, and certainly the evolution of the Asian region vis-a-vis these new political trends. Asia has a plethora of choices. We have seen knowledge hubs across West Asia. We've seen Dubai, we've seen Bangalore, we've seen Singapore. Of course, China has a few cities. India has invested in creating greater capacity. But you also have the big two. You have the Chinese tech, which is looming large over Asia. You have the US tech, which continues to be an important actor. How do you see Asia making its choices going ahead? Are we going to be caught in some geopolitical decision making, or are you going to see emergence of new centers and new ethics and new systems of technology growth?
Well, definitely we are seeing some kind of splinter net or the balkanization of the internet, because now the internet has become so critical to nations, whether it's in the delivery of public services, whether it's in free speech, whether it's in elections. So it's become so important that nations cannot sit quietly. So, and therefore you will see more variations of the internet based on a country's profile and government and so on. But I think the key thing for us in Asia is to be aware that this technology is balkanizing, and coming up with a strategy of technology which allows us to use the best from anywhere and does not lock us into any particular approach. And therefore creating no lock-in systems, creating no lock-in systems is entirely a function of architecture and software, which countries in Asia are very good at. Dubai has such a big base. Singapore has a base. It's all over. India is, of course, a huge nation in software. So how do we use software and architecture so that we don't get locked into a particular approach, a particular technology, and always have the freedom to strategically choose what we need?
Mr. Nilekani, you are someone who is in your core a businessman. You're an entrepreneur. You're an investor. You're a risk taker. If you were to go and talk to governments today in 2021, let's say you were to talk to the governments in Dubai, in Bangalore, or even national governments in UAE, India, Singapore, China, what would you be asking them for to accelerate the economic potential of technology, the economic potential of human capital, the economic potential of markets and capital?
Well, first of all, I would encourage them to invest more in a strategic digital architecture. One of the things we have learned in the last 20 years is that if you don't plan your digital infrastructure properly, then you do lead to winner-take-all models and monopolies emerging. And countries around the world, whether in the US, China, Australia, Europe, India, are all dealing with this now and are trying to see how they can regulate and so on. But I think more importantly, you need a digital architecture which creates innovation, that creates competition, that creates interoperability, that promotes switching if you want from one supplier to another and so on. And that's all about having the right infrastructure and also having the right model of APIs and so on. And that's what India has done. India has essentially built a digital infrastructure to create a more inclusive and democratized internet. And I believe this has learnings for the whole world. And we expect other countries will look at what has been done in India and see learnings that can be applied. For example, our whole data empowerment architecture is fundamentally profound because it allows individuals and businesses to use their own data for their benefit, which automatically goes against aggregation of data in one platform. And if you look at what's happening around the world, for example, the challenges in China where Alipay was unable to go through with its IPO, and now they're putting in more regulations that online lending platforms should put up to 30% of the capital on loans. All this is basically to ensure that there is a link between origination of credit and the provider of credit, so that the provider of credit, the originator of credit has skin in the game to ensure that the loans are given properly. In India, we don't have that issue at all because the data belongs to the borrower. So if I'm a small business, I have all my data which I can give to a lender and get a loan, and there's no intermediary who is taking it away. So these are all profound issues of how you design digital architectures at population scale. And the pandemic has shown that if countries are going to become so dependent on digital architectures, it's very, very important as a matter of strategy and public policy to architect them in a way that they promote competition and innovation.
Mr. Nilekani, let me take you deeper into your passion project, India Stack, and the whole plethora of investments by entrepreneurs in using this stack for creating real world solutions for the market, for customers, for citizens. Are you seeing appetite in the rest of the world for what we are doing? Is Mr. Nilekani and is the larger group of Indian businesses doing enough to promote this? Where do you think are India's key future markets, key future partnerships? Is Asia going to be one of the largest technology potential for India, Africa, Europe, America? How do you see the future of Indian technology spreading overseas, and what are you excited by?
Well, I think over the last decade, India has put in a set of thoughtful, highly scalable, population scale digital infrastructures that promote innovation and competition, whether it is the identity system, the payment system UPI, the data empowerment system, account aggregator, and many other things that have been done. And there is certainly a lot of interest around the world on this. I believe this is an area where both the Indian government and the Indian builders of these technologies, a lot of whom are housed in the iSpirit movement, can work together to create a new approach to digital public goods and take these globally. And I think that's happening. Can more be done? Of course, more can be done. But I think there's plenty of opportunity in Asia for implementing these approaches. Africa is also a big area. For example, recently, the Ministry of HRD and the World Bank organized a seminar for African nations on digital learning platforms using the Indian experience of the Diksha platform, which was incidentally built on top of an open source stack called Sunbird, created by a non-profit which I'm involved with. And so I think the fact is that increasingly there's an awareness of the fact that India seems to be like a home for what we call as digital public goods. And India Stack is a great example of that. And again, countries have realized that the future depends on digital penetration. But if the digital usage is not based on the right infrastructure and the right architectural principles, then it can lead to monopolies or duopolies, which are very difficult later on to undo. And therefore, having the right infrastructure to create an open, democratized, competitive economy requires to do this very carefully. And India has shown the way on that.
No, I'm going to ask you a question on regulation. It's an important point you raise in terms of managing the expanse of platforms. But which are the geographies you're excited by? If you were to be sitting in 2030, where would some of your investments have fructified outside of India? Which are the important geographies that you see your technologies and your effort creating new ventures and partnerships with?
Well, I really have two hats. I have a business hat and I have the public goods hat. So I talked about the public goods, and there, it's more my role as a tech evangelist to ensure that the concepts of Indian digital public goods are used globally. And then certainly Asia and Africa is a huge part of the opportunity. On the business side, I think opportunities all over. We are seeing a massive growth. At Infosys, we are seeing very good growth across the world because companies have realized that they have to be digitally native to get to where they want. And so we have come out, in the last 3 years, Infosys has reinvented itself into what we call as a live enterprise, which allows you to respond quickly to market and so on. And we are finding these principles are globally proving to be of great resonance. So I think both on the business side as well as the public side, I think there's an increasing awareness of the strategic role of technology. And certainly I see it in Asia and Africa, but certainly all over the world too.
So let me ask you two final questions. We have 4 minutes left in this particular conversation. The first question is, are you worried as a technologist that governments are back and we are going to start facing heavy-handed regulation? We are going to start seeing greater government control over business models. Are the Wild West days of technology over? And do you worry about it? And so a quick 2-minute answer on this.
Well, certainly untrammeled technology growth is probably over. At the same time, we have learned from this that it has had some negative effects, whether it's the rise of social media, political polarization, and so on. So governments have a right to get involved, but you have to strike the right balance between creating an open, innovative economy and reducing some of the negative effects of the internet.
And if you were to change one thing in 2021 from what you have done in the past, what would that be and why?
Well, I think we have learned the power of doing meetings and all through video conferencing like we're doing right now. So I do believe that people are going to be far more selective about where they go and when they go. And therefore, I think I certainly see less travel than I was doing, but much more fruitful travel where the travel is where I get to meet people and do things that I cannot do on a Zoom call. So I think clearly the balance will shift towards high quality personal interactions face to face.
Mr. Nilekani, thank you for that conversation. I think you have covered a very large tract of ideas and suggestions for many of us to inculcate in our own work. I think particularly the whole idea of flexibility built into technology architectures is something that all governments will have to look at carefully. We should not be locked into, otherwise we might lock out ourselves from our own future potential. Thank you for joining us. And let me hand this conversation back to the World Governance Summit. Mr. Nilekani, see you soon.
Thank you, Samir.
we have now had really a lot of insight on where the possible outlooks and potential outlooks for the Asian region lie.